Welcome to Classic Trials. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we make sense of the law one bite at a time. In this series, we observe and analyze the play-by-play of some of the biggest trials that have shaped the public consciousness of the American judicial system. In this season, we're working our way through the case of California v. Erik and Lyle Menendez. Growing up in Princeton, New Jersey, and then Beverly Hills, California, these young men had everything they could ever want, or so it seemed, until one night on August 20th, 1989, they approached Jose and Kitty Menendez with newly purchased shotguns. Put on trial for murdering their own parents, they claimed self-defense, arguing they were terrorized in their own home by abusive parents until they could take no more. Which argument is more convincing? Come join and see for yourself. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. I hope you're having a wonderful Monday. Very happy Monday. I was trying to get that intro transition right. Anyway, it wasn't perfectly smooth, but I almost got there. Anyhow, happy Monday. Happy Monday to everybody. We are now officially out of Christmas season. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but in the studio, we are officially out of Christmas season. I took some time this weekend to take everything down, organize all the Christmas stuff, kind of put it away. And yeah, so we're moving on into the year, and this also means for me personally that we're just like one step closer to our move into our next duty station with Mr. Bites. And yeah, so in a couple weeks we'll be moving now, it looks like. Yeah, exciting stuff. So, okay. Classic Trials. We last week, if you guys were with us last week, we went through the testimony of Dr. Irwin Golden. I don't know if you guys remember. He is the medical examiner who did the autopsies for both Kitty and Jose Menendez. So he was testifying to all of their injuries. I was self-censoring because the images that they were showing in the trial and showing to the public for this thing were very, they were tough. They were very difficult to watch. So I made the decision going into last week's episode that I wasn't going to show the images, because even though you probably could see them on, I mean, I'm getting this from Court TV's website, right? And you probably could see them. Indy, are you okay? I think she just coughed or something. I don't know what just happened. I think she's fine. She's fine. I just heard a weird noise. Anyway, so even though you can probably see the images fully on Court TV, Law and Crime Network, I think she's about to throw up. I'm sorry, guys. Anyway, okay, I'll check on her in a second. Even though you could probably see these images elsewhere, I don't want to risk it on my channel personally. So that's why I censored last week. I have since put a link in the description to the website on Court TV where you can see the whole thing if you really want to see all of the exhibits. I'm going to do the same thing today because we have part 2 of Dr. Irwin Golden's testimony. And so there's going to be more images, fewer than there were last time, because we're going to get into the cross-examination of him. And when we're talking about trial strategy, which side wants these graphic images out there? Which side wants the jury to be staring at these images? The prosecution, of course. So, so when it comes down to like what we expect to see on the cross-examination, the defense wants the jury to kind of set that aside, look at the rest of this case, because they're very powerful images. They really are. For anybody else that wants to see the exhibits, because, and absolutely zero shade, zero judgment if you want to, zero judgment if you don't want to, right? Because it's entirely a personal decision. You know, some people might want to see it because they want to see exactly what the jurors saw themselves. And what they evaluated and whatnot. I have already linked to the footage from today's live stream in the description below. So you guys can go and check that out. Now, was there something else that I was going to say? Oh, yeah. Also, Lucky, thank you for gifting so many Bite Club memberships. You've gifted 20 total already in a span of like 5 minutes. This is awesome. I am so thrilled. Thank you so much. Very generous of you once again to donate some memberships to a bunch of people, and to everyone that is now a new member of Bite Club. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I hope you can join us on Friday for our members only live stream, where we do a casual live stream hangout, talk about all kinds of stuff, sometimes law, sometimes not. This last time we talked a bit about law. We talked a little bit about some of the subjects that are coming out on the channel, and you get a chance to bring up some subjects. We can talk about some stuff and kind of help give me some guidance on what kind of content you want to see on this channel. So if that is something that anybody else that is not a member of Bite Club is interested in doing, it really is a great way to support the channel, especially when I'm covering topics kind of like this one that can sometimes get demonetized. Some of these live streams do get demonetized because of the nature of the subject matter. So, where some of the stuff that we're talking about is not exactly ad friendly. So YouTube will do that from time to time. Now give me one pause real quick so I can check up on Indy, and then we'll get into today's testimony. Okay. Sorry guys. Thanks so much. Pause. Minor update. Yeah, I've got something to clean up real quick. Everything's okay, but I'll be right back. Okay. All right. We are back. So, yeah. Thing about having a lab mix that is very food motivated. Sometimes it means when you go out on walks, she grabs things that she shouldn't. um anyway, so yeah, okay. Everything's good. She's fine. She's going to be fine. Anyway, let's get back to it, shall we? I completely forgot to even set up my shared screen. What am I doing? This is definitely a Monday. Okay. Alrighty. Good to see everybody here today. And let's get to it, shall we? Okay, so like I said, this is going to be Dr. Irwin Golden. We've got part 2 of his testimony, and yeah, continuing on with the prosecution first, and then we're going to get to the cross-examination. Okay. All right, let's get into it.
Zoom with the testimony of the.
Hang on. Why is this coming through? Wait a minute. Okay, sorry. Sound is coming through the wrong speakers here for me.
Witness.
There we go.
Dr. Golden, would you get back on the witness stand, please?
And I'm so sorry. Hey, yeah, living life with and singing songs with Mallory. You're right. I didn't actually do my normal hellos to everybody. I'm so sorry about that. One of them is from you. Hello from Utah. Hope everyone is having a good year so far. I look forward to these live streams. Keep up the good work, Alita. You're doing an amazing job. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And Cheryl M says, hey from Oz, listening to the end of Adele One Night Only. Nice. Very nice. Hello, Cheryl. Hope you're having a good day. Melissa Simox says, morning from rainy Beverly Hills. Hashtag Menendez Monday. It's another Menendez Monday. So yes. Hi, Melissa. Good to see you. Ryan Gallo says, good morning all from stormy California. Looking forward to another installment of this trial. Yes, 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 yes. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to it as well. And let's see. Where have we got some other folks coming in from? We've got Donna Grace. Hello from the UK. We've got B. Hello from Germany. Secret McSquirrel coming in from Glasgow. Sandra Ramirez saying hi from Savannah. As soon as it pops up on StreamYard, here we go. I hope I didn't miss any from earlier. I may have. Let me see. I'm gonna go through and see. We've got a lot of love for Indy here in the chat, which is nice. Very kind. Thank you guys. And I think that might be. Oh, we've got some more here now. Let's see. Nurse M, hello from NYC with very nice weather. Good to see you. Night Eyes, hello from Cantor. Hey from Canterbury. Hey, Night Eyes. Good to see you. Okay. We've got Brittany Chanel coming in from a cold Illinois, currently in class, hashtag senior year. So I will catch the replay. All right, Brittany. Awesome. Good to hear it. And good luck in your class. I hope everything goes well. Aussie Chris tuning in from Australia. All right, Aussie Chris. Good to see you. Elizabeth Ardal. Hi from Norway. Hey, Elizabeth. Proverbial Fly. Greetings from South Florida. Hey. Good to see you. Aaron Morgan also from England. Hello from England. Didn't get notification, but just finished the L&D stream number 4 with EDB and it happened to come up. Awesome. Well, maybe it's a good thing that we got a few delays here and going into this today's testimony. Cheryl, and by the way, I was listening while Alita wasn't here. Okay. So it says very stormy California. Gina D, blessings from Boca Raton. And Karen Vaughn, hi from Chile. Haley Mouse, currently making a cup of tea in Bletchley, England. Nice. I love it. And Debbie Faison Cook, thanks so much. Says Indy is ours by extension now. Of course, we love her. Oh, well, good. I'm glad. I'm very glad. And also Night 01007, first live stream I've caught since Deb. Welcome back. I hope you enjoy this. We're gonna go through some more trial testimony. If you're just airdropping in, this is the Menendez trial. We've got a lot of testimony that has come out so far, and this is gonna be some hopefully not too gruesome stuff by the descriptions, but we'll see. Yeah, we're gonna try to do what we can so that we don't get struck by the YouTube gods. Desiree Morgan says hi from Montreal, Canada. Love your channel. Thank you so much. Well, and thanks for tuning in. All right. Okay, let's get to it, shall we? All righty.
Would you state your name again for the record?
Irwin Golden.
All right, you may resume your direct examination.
Thank you. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Dr. Golden, I want to return now to the autopsy that you performed on Jose Menendez. I'm going to ask you about the wound, which we have termed here as wound number 4. I believe the testimony was that wound number 4 is the wound to the left elbow. Do you recall that testimony from this morning, Dr. Golden?
Yes.
I have here a photograph which is marked as Exhibit 79.
Another
And in the
Paisley's
photograph,
tie, by the
there
way.
appears to be a left elbow with some various pellet or various defects to it. Is this a photograph of wound number 4 to Jose Menendez?
Yes.
And in this photograph, there appears to be some sort of metal object which is inserted into one of the holes. Could you tell me what the name of this object is and why it's there?
It's a probe.
All right, and censoring.
I guess to show one of the pellet hole defects.
And for the record, I'm going to place a red dot here next to this.
This one's not as bad as some of the other ones that we saw, but
the chart later on.
Yeah.
Now, leaving Jose Menendez and turning to Mrs. Menendez, before lunch you testified about a wound to the left side of her head near the ear, and I believe we call that one wound number 4 as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, I have here a photograph. It's been marked as Exhibit 91. I'd like to show it to the witnesses at this time, please. Showing this photograph, does this depict what we have called in your testimony wound number 4 to Mary Louise Menendez?
Yes.
And I believe your testimony before lunch was that there are 2 separate defects. That is, there's one to the shoulder and one to the near her ear. And it's your testimony that these are probably affiliated because of the presence of birdshot in both the shoulder wound and also in the area near the ear. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to place this on the board and place
censoring this one.
a red dot with
This
the
all
number 4
nudity,
next to this wound too as well.
if I remember
Excuse
correctly.
me, not a red dot, a green dot.
Oh no, it's just gruesome.
In
How's the
addition,
volume,
I
by the
don't
way?
think
It just
we've
reduced
marked
for me. If you guys
diagram
need me to
90 with a
bump it,
green dot for that particular wound, and so this time I'd like to, Your Honor,
I can maybe bump it.
to indicate that area as well. I have a couple questions to ask you about your testimony this morning before we can proceed. Wound number 2
Okay,
is the
volume's
wound
fine.
to the upper part on the right side of her face, and wound number 3 is to the lower portion of the right side of her face. Referring now to wound number 2, approximately how many individual pellet defects did you see?
Approximately 10.
And as wound number 3, which is lower near her collarbone, how many individual pellet defects did you see?
Approximately 10.
And as to wound number 6, which I believe is on the left breast area, approximately how many pellet defects did you see?
$16.
I think then we're proceeding on to wound number 7. Could you describe for the jury briefly wound number 7?
Briefly, that's a distant type of shotgun wound with multiple pellet defects on the left side of the left hip or thigh region. That would be the outside of the left hip or thigh region, with approximately 11 individual shotgun pellet wounds.
Now, when you say, could you just stand up and show us on yourself what part of the body this is on?
I guess you'd call it the left hip region.
Okay. About where the bottom of your pocket is on your pants, is that where it's pointed to? All right.
Yes.
And looking at diagram 90 then, where you've just indicated, I'm going to mark a dot for number 7. I'm going to place it here and make sure it's correct. About here, over on the side, is that right?
Yes.
And was the entry then on the side, sort of towards the front? Was that the entry wound on this particular wound number 7?
Well, it's on the what I would call the lateral. That's on the outside or the side of the left thigh.
Now, in addition to wound number 7, then there's wound number 8. Could you tell us about wound number 8?
8 is on the back of the left leg, entering anatomically what I would call the popliteal fossa, which is the space behind the left knee.
Okay, so that word that term you just used, you're talking about in the crook of the knee right here. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so wound number 8 is from behind on the left leg in the crook of the knee. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so where I put this this green dot right here on diagram 90, is that
Yes, that would be what I would call the popliteal fossa behind the left knee. That's correct.
Now, let's talk about, let's go back to wound number 7. Wound number 7 was individual pellet defects, is that correct?
Yes.
And how many individual pellet defects approximately did you count?
11.
So that would indicate again a shot from a distance, correct?
Yes.
Now, number 8, which is also on the left leg from behind, what kind of wound was that? Was that individual pellets?
Yes.
And approximately how many individual pellet defects did you see to the back of the knee?
9.
Then I believe there's one more injury to the left leg, is that correct? Which is called wound number 9.
Yes.
And I believe in your report, you called it something like a gutter or a graze wound. Could you briefly tell us what a gutter or a graze wound is?
Basically, it's a superficial wound that sort of digs out the surface, the skin, and the tissue beneath the skin. And it's a deep, it would be like a deep graze wound. It goes beneath the skin.
Would that be that the load of the shot was passing by and nicked or?
Yes, there are no it's one defect, which means that the shot was clustered and caused one defect as it grazed or the outside of the left lower leg.
Could you tell what direction the shot was traveling when it made wound number 9?
Yes, it appeared to be traveling. Again, I'm going to have to use my terminology. I said front to back, but that would be basically the front of the leg to the back of the leg, which we would say anterior to posterior.
So if I were facing the shot, it would be from the front of me towards the back of me. Is that correct?
Yes, in that direction. That's
All
correct.
right. And could you tell which way it was going? Straight or up or down? Could you tell that?
Well, on the leg, it was going. Again, I'd have to, in my terminology, it would be distal to proximal, which means it would be, if the body were standing straight, it would be going upward, towards the head.
So if I were standing up, it would be from the front and going up. Is that correct?
Up, if you're standing up, that's right.
In the photograph, which we've discussed previously, Exhibit 80, which already has a dot on it, there appears to be some wounds to the left leg, and I'm going to ask you about it, and I'm going to have you do it so the jury can see. You just described wound 9, and I'm going to place a green dot on the diagram 90 for wound 9.
This is definitely one I wanted to censor.
Of the left leg in the calf area. Is that correct?
Yes?
And in this photograph 80, which we've already spoken about, we've got the arm and wound number 6. And then you can see in this particular photograph, on the calf, there appears to be this wound here, which
Yeah,
you
this is
described. And is that
The
wound
autopsy of
number 9?
Mrs. Menendez right
Yes.
now.
Okay, Your Honor, for the record, I'm going to place a 9 next to that. Now, in addition to wound number 9, there appears to be 2 other things on this photograph on the left leg that you can see from the photograph. One is it looks like wounds to the top of the left thigh above the knee. Do you see that right there?
Yes.
Is that affiliated with the wound to the back of the leg, left leg, number 8?
No.
Okay, what is this wound here?
It appears to be number 7, when we call number 7, on the outside of the,
All right, so this is number 7, is that correct?
yes, I believe, yes.
All right, I'm going to put a 7 next to that wound. All right, and that's the one you described as being near the hip, and you showed us by standing up, is that correct?
Yes?
In addition, where it appears that the knee is, you can see a little outcropping here, which is difficult to see in this photograph. Is that affiliated with the wound then to the back of the knee?
I'm not sure.
All right, well.
The one I call number 8 enters behind the knee.
Did number 8 come out anywhere?
Yes, there were 2 defects of exit associated with number 8. They were on the front of the left leg, just above, and I described them just above the one just below the knee, one just above the knee. 2 small wounds which probed and appeared to be exit wounds from shotgun wound number 8.
So then your testimony is that 7, 8, and 9 of them.
That interruption,
are
I
all
think, was
wounds
a
to
cop
the
radio.
left leg. Is that correct?
Yes?
The last wound that we're going to talk about then is wound number 10. Would you please refer to that in your report? We
Yes.
have here a photograph, Exhibit 81. Dr. Golden, this photograph 81, does that depict what you're about to talk about wound number 10?
Yes.
And would you describe for us what is depicted in this photograph and what this wound number 10 is?
Excuse me, Your Honor, before that happens, can we approach the
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, we'll resume.
Thank you. Dr. Golden, the last wound area that we're going to talk about, I think.
Camera's panning right now. I don't know where it's going to
is
end.
This photograph, which
Okay.
I forgot what number it is.
Never mind. So that's good.
81, this is wound number 10, correct?
Yes?
Now I'm going to place a green 10 tag next to it. What hand was this?
That's the right hand.
So, and were you able to determine where the entry was and the exit wounds on this particular hand?
Well, yeah, yes, the individual pellet defects are seen on the at the base of the right thumb and also on just below the right index finger. In other words, on the I guess you'd say I don't know if that would be the outside or the inside of the hand. I would call it the radial aspect of the hand.
What
But-
does radial mean?
Where, well, in our case, it'd be where the thumb is.
All right, so in this photograph, which appears to show sort of the top and side of her right hand and thumb. The entry wounds would have been in this area that's depicted in the photograph.
Yes.
And where were the exit wounds?
There was one large exit laceration that was on the palm. There was an exit laceration on the opposite side of the hand where the fifth finger is. You can't see it. You can't see it in that.
So
Just talking about the
was
pinky.
the exit laceration on the inside of the hand?
Yes.
Okay, where the palm is. Is
Yeah.
that correct?
Mhm.
All right. Now,
So basically, I guess like right here.
is this a defensive wound? Or can you say that?
No, unless it can be shown how the hand would be placed in the proper position.
All right. Let me ask you this. How many individual pellet defects did you see in terms of entry wounds to the hand?
To the hand,
Yes.
I numbered 6 individual pellet wounds, and the thumb was fractured, so it was. In our terminology, the skin was torn off. It was a vulse, but
Debbie, the laceration
I
would be
counted 6
from a shotgun.
individual defects. So that would make it a distant type of.
So they're talking about shotgun
of shot to
pellets,
the
and bird
hand.
shot, and all this stuff.
Were
These
there
are all.
any pellets recovered from the hand?
No.
Did the pellet, would this be what you call a through and through wound?
Yes.
Your Honor, for the record, I'm going to place a 10 here on Exhibit 90 on the back view of the person on the right hand. For the record. And may I have a moment?
Yeah, but it could be from
Make sure I have them all
from the
covered.
heat
Yes.
of the shotgun, or because there were some heat damage that I think happened on some of these wounds as well.
Now, the wound number 10 to the right hand, that wouldn't have been fatal, would it?
No.
And how about the wounds that we've discussed since lunch? Wounds number 7, 8, and 9. The wounds to the left leg. Would those have been fatal?
Each individually?
Yes.
No.
Together, the three together, would those have been fatal?
Maybe not immediately fatal, but it'd have to be treated. There'd be a lot of bleeding.
Would they be incapacitating to the victim?
Yes, I believe I described several fractures of the leg,
Yeah.
including the femur or thigh bone on one of these wounds.
The point. Hang on.
Also, the fracture of the thumb.
The point here with them asking about all of these different injuries and then asking, would these have been incapacitating? Would this one have been incapacitating? Would that one have been incapacitating? The reason for that is each one is a potential step that the sons would have taken to hypothetically like eliminate the danger, right? Because the theory is they are using an expanded form of self-defense theory. You know, they said that they were fearing for the repercussions, you know, in standing up to their father in particular. And so what the prosecution is doing is they're laying out all of these different gunshot wounds and saying this one would have done it, this one would have done it, this one would have done it, because the moment that they take an action against their parents after they've already been incapacitated, arguably they've gone beyond what would be allowed under a self-defense theory, because you're only allowed to use the amount of force that is reasonably necessary to end the danger. Okay.
Thumb on the right hand.
Now, as to Mary Louise Menendez, did you determine what the cause of death was?
Yes.
And what was the cause of death?
Multiple shotgun wounds.
And what was the mode of death?
Homicide.
As to Mrs. Menendez, did you have any toxicology tests done to determine the presence or absence of alcohol or other narcotics or drugs?
Yes.
And were any of those things detected?
No.
One other thing. You described the wounds to both Mr. and Mrs. Menendez, and would you be able to tell let's start with Mr. Menendez. Were all of the wounds inflicted before death or at death?
That's a comment.
Okay, were all the wounds inflicted before death?
They appear to be so, yes.
Now, is there a medical term that you use to describe wounds which are inflicted before death?
Yes.
What is it?
Antemortem means before death.
And post-mortem is after death, is that correct?
Yes.
And then there's the term peri-mortem. What does that mean?
That, by definition, would be at or around the time of death.
Now, how is it that you are able to determine that wounds occur before death, that is ante-mortem?
A wound inflicted before death will show bruising, redness caused by bleeding into the tissue.
When you conducted this autopsy, did you look along the paths of the wounds to see if there was bleeding along the paths of the wounds?
Yes.
What does bleeding indicate if you see it along the paths of the wounds?
Well, the bleeding or bruising would be associated with a wound inflicted before death. A wound inflicted after death ordinarily would not be expected to cause bruising or bleeding into the tissues.
Do you consider bruising and bleeding to be the same sort of phenomena in terms of?
Not necessarily. No. A wound can bleed after death, but that means blood is just oozing out through a defect. That can happen. That often happens. I'm talking about a vital reaction indicating that there was life or blood pressure before the wound was inflicted.
Now, as to Mr. Menendez, did you determine that all of the wounds were before death?
Yes, I believe I've stated that.
And as to Mrs. Menendez, did you make that same determination?
Yes, nothing appeared characteristically a post-mortem wound, meaning a wound inflicted after death. They all appear to be associated with bruising or a vital reaction, yes.
I have no further questions of this witness at this time.
Passing the witness.
And who is going to cross-examine first?
I am, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Burt. Yes, you may.
Good afternoon, Dr. Golden.
Good afternoon.
Sir, I think you said that both these autopsies were performed on the 23rd of August. Is that right?
Yes.
And where were the bodies between the time the police discovered them, which the jury has heard is on August 20th, and the 23rd when you performed your autopsies?
They should have been in the coroner's office.
And is it true from your answer that the first time you saw the bodies was when you actually performed the autopsies themselves?
Yes.
Do you have someone in your office who actually responds to the scene where bodies are found to make certain observations as to the condition of the bodies at the place where they're located?
Yes.
And in fact, was an investigator from your office sent out to the scene where these bodies were found?
Yes.
Did that person make a report which you have seen in the course of performing your analysis of these bodies?
Yes.
Could you tell us who the person was who was sent to the scene where these bodies were found?
Yes. It was Mr. George White.
And what time, according to the report which you read, did Mr. White arrive at the scene where these bodies were found?
Well, I'm reading the report. The call was received at the coroner's office on 8/21/89, 03:57 hours. Mr. White does not indicate when he arrived. At least he doesn't indicate in this report right now that I'm looking at. I can tell you about his measurements.
Well, let me ask you another question to see if we can pinpoint it a little bit. One of the things you said this morning was that one of the reasons you could not determine the time of death was because someone in your office did not take certain measurements in a timely manner. Is that a fair summary of what you were trying to say this morning?
Yes,
And is one of the things that Mr. White was supposed to have done when he arrived at the scene of these bodies was to take the temperature of the air, the ambient condition of the air at that point?
yes,
And is it also standard procedure for him to take the temperature of the body?
yes.
And how is that normally done?
It's done through a liver thermometer.
And that's normally done right there at the scene where the body is discovered before the body's transported to your office, right?
Yes,
Now, did he do that in this case?
yes.
And can you tell me what measurements he made and when he made them?
Yes. Air temperature was 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and that was 0535. That's 5:35 in the morning, 8:21:89. Then the liver temperature was taken 0544 hours, 8:21:89.
Now, we're talking about Jose Menendez, correct?
Yes,
And did he also take separate measurements for Mary Louise Menendez?
yes.
And what were the measurements?
The air temperature was 68 degrees, time 0600 hours, 8:21:89. The liver temperature 91 degrees, 0608 hours, 8:21:89.
All right, so tell us how you as a coroner can use those measurements to determine time of death.
Again, it wouldn't be time, it would be a range approximation. As a coroner, I would assume the body temperature started at, let's say, 98.6 or 99 degrees, and then the fall of the
That's prior to death, right?
prior to death, yeah.
Okay,
And that again is not certain either. It could be 100. That's unknown to me.
we're talking averages.
Yes,
Okay,
normal average temperature could be 98 also. And then I would calculate on each individual the fall or drop in body temperature. So in the case of Mr. Menendez, it would be from, let's say, 99 to 90 degrees, a fall of 9 degrees. And then I would have to assume the rate of drop, which again is not uniform. That's why these measurements aren't precise. So,
and what would you assume the rate of drop to be?
well, it could be 1.5 degrees per hour.
Could be.
That again is just an average.
That's right. It is an average. That's correct.
So what they're getting at here with the cross-examination is so it's easy to look at a medical expert. I mean, he's technically not, I don't think he was qualified as an expert here because he's the one that reviewed the autopsy, right? He's not being brought in to give his expert opinion from an objective standard looking at this case. But regardless, you have somebody who is credentialed in medicine, has like all of the expertise and experience that the jury is going to be listening to the kinds of things that he has to say and his analysis here. And what the cross-examination, what the defense is trying to get at here is to say the prosecution wants to say that they can analyze these things, these data points on the bodies and come to a lot of certain conclusions, but the defense is saying let's take a look under the hood here. These are all probabilities. There are some assumptions that have to go into it. So how much are they actually able to really conclude from this stuff? And how much can you actually rely on the conclusions that they are formulating based on this? So what they're going to be doing here throughout this cross-examination, my guess is that they're basically going to be going through and trying to find all of the points where the medical examiner maybe didn't do their best work in in examining these bodies, because on the one hand, they said in their opening statements, they're not disputing who did it, right? Nobody is arguing here that the Menendez brothers did not shoot their parents. They're not, like on the hunt trying to find who really did it, right? But their argument is that they were legally justified because of that expanded self-defense argument. Now, at the same time, the defense still wants to do whatever they can to poke holes in the prosecution's case, where they are putting on the medical examiner, where they are putting on various other experts throughout this trial, to basically say, like, okay, but you want to lead the jury down this road to make all of these conclusions, but we want to introduce reasonable doubt. So with this whole part about body temperatures and things of that nature, they're trying to do the same thing. They're basically saying, okay, you don't know what their body temperature was at the moment that they died, because as Dr. Golden mentioned, he said they could have started at 100 degrees, right? Maybe they were running a fever when they died. That also really depends on the conditions of the environment, right? Like what was the temperature of the room that they were in? Which they haven't specifically said that, but I mean, that's something that doesn't take too long to think about. And he's talking about how even the rate of the body losing temperature, they don't exactly know. They have to take an approximation. So that's basically what this whole bit of testimony is getting at right now.
And so how do you use that average and extrapolate back to come up with an estimation of time of death?
Well, I would divide the number of degrees of drop, which in this case was 9 degrees by 1.5. You can divide by 1 and get 9, divide by 2, be about 4.5. So if you would calculate that would be 6 hours, which would be impossible because the body was found at 2350 on 820, and that's more than 6 hours according to the calculation. If you went back from 5:35 and go back 6 hours, it could possibly be around that time.
And how is it that the delay in taking those measurements caused your estimates to be even more inaccurate?
Ooh, there it is.
Well, the closer you are to the time of death, the more accurate the measurements would be.
And I think you mentioned other ways in which you can determine time of death, and one of the things you mentioned was rigor, rigor mortis, correct?
Yes.
Tell the juries how you use that phenomenon to measure time of death.
Again, it's an estimate, and it is not precise. Rigor mortis, the stiffening of the muscles after death, begins several hours after death, beginning in the muscles of the jaw and then proceeding down to the limbs, lower and lower extremities. Usually, it's said to be complete. In other words, fully established somewhere between 10 and 12 hours after death.
10 or 12 hours after death, it's well established.
That's the usual figure, but it can be shorter after vigorous activity. It can be longer. It depends on a variety of factors.
And in fact, in this case, your deputy noticed when he was there and noted in his report that both bodies had well-established rigor mortis, correct?
Yes.
So if you extrapolate back 10 hours from the time that he made that observation, that couldn't possibly be right, could it?
Doesn't appear so. It does not follow the liver temperature measurements.
Is it fair to say that within your field of forensic pathology, that estimating time of death is one of the most uncertain things that you do?
It is very uncertain. Yes.
And in this particular case, you couldn't venture any opinion to these juries with any reasonable degree of medical certainty as to what the time of death was. Isn't that true?
Yeah. Yes. Just from the measurements on the body, no, I could not.
And you have no other way of doing it, correct?
Only I can say is sometime before the body was found, 2350 hours on 8/20/89. That year I guess I can be reasonably sure.
All right. That kind of goes outside the area of your expertise and depends more on logic than anything else, right?
Yes.
We don't need a forensic pathologist to make those deductions, do we?
Probably not.
All right. Now, could I approach a witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
The autopsies which you performed, I think you performed the autopsy on Jose Menendez first.
Yes.
And tell the juries how you go about performing the autopsy. That everybody's got an idea from television how that's done, but why don't you tell us just in general how you go about performing the autopsy? Is there a microphone that you're dictating into?
No, we don't. At the LA coroner's office, we don't use a microphone. It's a very busy place. We make the diagrams as we are performing the autopsy, diagrams and notes, and then dictate the report the same day shortly thereafter.
So in other words, right at the autopsy table, you have blank diagrams, and as you're performing the autopsy, you're kind of scribbling down in doctor's handwriting what you're observing. Is that fair to say?
I guess if you want to characterize it as scribbling.
Well, showing you what's been marked as exhibits. First of all, exhibit 87. Is that the packet of diagrams which was produced as a result of your autopsy of Jose Menendez?
Yes.
And basically, does this packet of diagrams show each wound which you've described for the jury, along with what I would characterize as scribbling, but I'm sure you could read that for us, right?
I could read most of it, yes.
Okay, most of it. And how about 88? Is that the packet of documents that represent the diagrams you made with reference to the Mary Louise Menendez autopsy?
Yes.
Okay. And after you take down those notes, you then at some later point go back and dictate a formal report, which is a more elaborate recordation of what you observed and the conclusions that you reach. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the last item in the report is usually your opinion as to the cause of death, correct?
Yes.
And the manner of death.
Well, the opinion gives a summary of the basic findings. The death certificate gives the cause and manner. It's required by state law to issue the death certificate and to give a medical opinion, which is not legally binding, of the mode of death.
The means and the mode are the same thing. It's just a different way of saying the same thing.
The mode or manner, it would be the same thing. That's right.
And in this case, the cause of both deaths of both of these decedents was multiple gunshot wounds, correct?
Shotgun, yes.
And the means or the mode of death, you said, was homicide, correct?
Yes.
Now, does that mean that you're simply making a determination as to mode that it's death at the hands of another?
Yes.
It's not a legal opinion on your part that it's murder or some lesser degree of homicide. You're simply saying by that opinion, as you're legally required to do, that it appears to you that it's death at the hands of another.
That's absolutely correct.
In other words, that it's not suicidal.
Yes.
And it's not accidental.
Yes.
Whether it's a justifiable homicide or not is for the jury. It's not for the coroner's office in the course of your duties, correct?
Yes.
And that's what you meant when you referred to homicide.
Yes.
All right.
There's
Now,
always
in
something that the
reference
defense
to
is going to
the
point out.
Jose Menendez autopsy,
The defense is always going to point out that when they are talking about the manner of death and they point to homicide, that is a medical term that they are using, not a legal term. So when the medical examiner says that, Kitty and Jose Menendez died in a homicide, that means that they died at the hands of someone else. It has no bearing on, or it gives no opinion as to whether or not the killings were justified. So defense in any murder case, they are going to point that out where the medical examiner has determined that homicide was the manner of death. So that's kind of like one of those like box checks that they pretty much have to do. And by the way, how charismatic is this attorney that's doing the cross-examination? Every single cross that we've seen him do has just been so smooth. It's like he makes the witness his friend. Like, you would never know that they were being cross-examined, because his style is not the style of like, I'm going to put you in the hot seat. I'm going to make you sweat bullets, and I'm going to make you, tell me what you're going to tell me under duress. Like, he's just like, he just, it's as if they're just kind of hanging out and chatting and kind of talking about the finer points of the testimony here, right?
Autopsy, I'd like to direct your attention to a few of the specific wounds that you talked about. And the first one we're going to talk about is what you've designated as wound number 1. Actually, in your report, the first wound you described is the abrasion on the right thigh area, correct?
Yes.
And just looking at the diagram that's been placed on the board, that would be a red mark that is on the right thigh that doesn't have a number.
And so the cross-examination
Yes.
is only going to be showing these diagrams. They're
Describe
not
that
going to be
as
showing the
recent
gory
abrasion,
photos.
correct?
Yes.
And you didn't mean to imply by describing it as a recent abrasion that abrasion was necessarily associated with the same time that the shotgun wounds were inflicted, correct?
Not necessarily. It's just consistent with, as I think I described earlier, with the marks you very often see with shotgun wounds. Well, no, not necessarily.
And it could be equally consistent with an abrasion which the decedent may have suffered sometime earlier, which may have been inflicted at a time when the shotgun wounds were not inflicted, right?
It's possible, yes.
He could have been out playing tennis and scraped himself or whatever. It wasn't necessarily, in your mind, associated with the same time that the shotgun wounds were inflicted.
Again, I'll say it's consistent with the marks you frequently see on distant type of shotgun wounds, the wad marks, but there's no way I can say 100% that it's a wad mark from the shotgun wadding, but the distant shotgun wounds, as most of these are in this case, are associated with these round, or what I call annular abrasions.
Okay, let's take a short break and we'll resume at 1:45. Don't discuss the case with anyone, ladies and gentlemen. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll resume at 2:45. Now the defendants are in court with their attorneys. People are represented.
I love
and
these
we'll have the
short
jury
breaks.
come out. Any matters that council wish to discuss before we're ready to proceed?
Just one issue, Your Honor. There was a blow-up of a photograph. It had previously been marked by the people as Exhibit 7. We had objected to that photograph going into evidence. The court overruled the objection, and the people have had marked as, I believe, 7A and 7B, smaller enlargements of that same photograph, so that we had 2 for each jury. I just wanted the record to reflect that those photographs were offered by the people, not by the defense.
What is it the people want to do? Substitute the smaller photographs for the larger one, or?
No, Your Honor, what happened is the court wanted 2 copies. I couldn't get the same size of 7. All I could get were 8 by 10s. Mr. Burt wants to use number 7 for the jury, so I gave him the 2 8 by 10s, which had not been marked prior to today. So 7 is the photograph we discussed with one of the first witnesses, and the 2 smaller ones are 2 copies for each jury.
All right. You parties may do what they want with those photographs. You want to use the smaller ones or the one larger one as you see fit. All right, we ready to proceed otherwise?
Yes.
Okay, let's get the jurors in. And all the jurors are back for both defendants, and we're ready to resume. Dr. Golden, would you get on the witness stand again, please?
Also, he's got a nice paisley tie today, too.
All right, Mr. Burt.
Dr. Golden, before the break, we were talking about whether the thigh wound to Jose Menendez on his right thigh may have been pre-existing, that is, existing before the time when the shotgun wounds were inflicted. And I asked you a question about that, and I think you indicated that the wounds were consistent with perhaps the wadding of a shotgun charge striking the thigh area. Is that correct?
Yes.
And isn't it true that it's also consistent with the abrasion being pre-existing?
That's possible too.
All right. Now, that was the first wound you described in your autopsy protocol, and the second wound I think you described as the contact wound to the head. Is that right?
Yes, that was the first shot. That was the first shotgun wound. Yes.
And on the diagram, which is behind you there, the dot, which is depicted as number 1, shows that, at least according to the dot, the wound was inflicted on the right side of the skull. Is that accurate according to your autopsy?
No, she put it next to the head, but it's actually on the back of the head.
And I wonder if you could yourself put it where it would accurately reflect where the wound was located on the back.
Just on the back of the head, below the crown.
So here, more to the left.
May I see where your hand is? Right in the
You gotta
middle.
do it, then there won't be any dispute as to it.
Interesting.
Okay.
So it's very subtle, but also what he just did was he kind of pointed to the diagrams and all the dots that the prosecutor's been placing on the diagram this whole time, as she's showing the photos that I've been censoring. So you guys have seen some of the diagrams, but not all of them. I mean, they basically all look like that, and she's been putting dots on them along the way. And it's just very subtle, but basically the defense attorney here is showing prosecution is, the DA here. She is she's placing things in a way that are a bit more advantageous to her, perhaps, or at least inaccurate. How much can you really rely on these diagrams here? Because, we've got some things that are potentially inaccurate. So it's not the kind of thing that would kill the prosecution's case, but it's these little subtle pinpricks almost,
For the record, you move the dot on the diagram for the Lyle Menendez jury in the center. And could you tell from your examination the direction of that shot?
The direction is from the back of the head forward. In other words, back to front.
Back to front, and I think you said that there was an exit wound, which was actually on the right side of the face. Is that right?
Yes.
And there were 2 exit wounds, were there not?
Yes.
There was an exit wound which came through the ear,
Yes.
and the other one was on the right temple, correct?
Yes.
And was the trajectory of this wound from left to right, or was it straight ahead?
It'd be hard to tell, but going out on the right side just indicates ricochet from the main mass of pellets. That does not indicate trajectory. There's going to be ricochet inside the skull, so that doesn't indicate the trajectory.
Is there anything that you can tell from your examination where the gun was positioned in relation to the wound in the sense of whether it was straight ahead or slanted to the left or slanted to the right?
Not from my examination, no.
And was there anything in your examination from which you could tell where the shooter was in relation to the head wound? In other words, was the shooter or shooters off to the left, directly behind the person, or to the right?
No, I can't tell that. I can only tell you the approximate location of the muzzle of the gun, and that it was a contact. I can't say anything about the shooter.
And would one of the reasons why you can't say anything about the shooter be because perhaps the parties were moving at the time that that particular wound was inflicted?
That and I don't know which way the head was turned, and I don't know how the weapon was held. So there are a lot of variables. The position of the shooter is not known to me. There are too many variables. Each body can move in different ways, and I don't even know how the weapon was held.
All right. And I have two photographs that I'll mark defendants next in order, one for each jury.
By the way, hey, Kurt.
Another photograph
See you in the
that
chat.
I'll have, marked
Good to see you.
for the 93.
You describe these photographs with 92.
Yes,
What-
92 is a crime scene photograph depicting the back of the couch area where Jose Menendez is seated on the couch. And 93 is a photograph of the wound to Jose Menendez going through the left thigh. And the photograph depicts him seated on the couch. Could I approach your witness again, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, let me show you that in close-up, and then I'll put it up on the board.
Yes.
Right. Do you recognize that photograph as depicting Jose Menendez seated on the couch at the location where the body was recovered?
Not by direct recall, but I was not present at the scene, if that's what you meant.
Can you take my word for it for now that that's what it represents?
Yes.
Later established. I think there would be a stipulation that's what it represents. Is that correct?
This one we'll see.
Yes.
Because the image isn't- It's not that bad.
And doctor, directing your attention to that photograph, you see behind the
I'll
body
let
as it's
this
seated
one
there on the couch is
be
an
visible.
area,
Oh, well.
a narrow area, and next to the area is what looks to be two doors. Do you see that?
Yes.
And nothing in your examination can tell us whether the shooter was standing in the area directly behind where the body is depicted in that photograph, correct?
From my examination?
Yeah.
No.
And as I think you said, one of the reasons why you can't determine that is because Jose Menendez may have had his head turned at the time that wound was inflicted, correct?
Yes.
And depending upon where his head was, that would be one factor in determining where he was in relation to the shooter, correct?
Yes.
So you just don't know from your examination where the two parties were standing, or three parties were standing, or more parties were standing at the time that wound was inflicted. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, I think you also testified that that wound, that is the wound to the head, was the only contact wound of the 5 shotgun wounds that you described in relation to Jose Menendez.
Yes.
And I think you also testified that with respect to Mary Louise Menendez, there was also only one contact wound, and that contact wound was to the left cheek area. Is that correct?
Yes,
And all the other wounds you described were non-contact wounds. Is that right?
yes,
And I think you classified in terms of the way you describe wounds as contact wounds, close wounds, and distant wounds, correct?
yes,
And all the other wounds except for the two that we just talked about were distant wounds, correct?
yes,
And I think you indicated that you couldn't pinpoint for the juries exactly what that meant in terms of how far the muzzle of the gun was from the target at the time the shots were inflicted, correct?
that's absolutely right.
You can give us a range or an average or an estimate, but it's only that. It's just an average.
That's correct.
And I think you said that a distant shot starts to be defined as 5 or 6 feet or more away from the target.
That's correct. Ordinarily, and I indicated also, shorter barrel, sawed-off shotgun, a distant shot would be closer than that.
You know,
Full choke, it could be 18 feet, but
closer in the sense that a sawed-off shotgun will cause a distant shot at a closer
yeah,
range.
that's correct.
Correct.
The spread starts sooner, maybe 3 feet.
Right. The firearms examiner in this case testified, I believe, that the barrel of the gun that he examined was 18 and a half inches in length. So that's not a sawed-off shotgun, right?
That's getting close. Under 20, under 20 maybe. Again, I'm not a firearms examiner, so I wouldn't know exactly.
And when you say you wouldn't know exactly, what you mean by that is in order to determine exactly what the range would be for a distant shot, you'd have to fire the same weapon using the same ammunition.
Absolutely.
Now, as you step back, that is as a
So that is getting at, where exactly were these guys positioned when they shot these various shots from the shotguns. No one can tell you that from the prosecution because of the fact that they were not able to apprehend the weapons after the incident. Those were completely those were a complete mystery. So as to like what happened to them. So this is just more analysis of like, you don't really know who was where at various points in time, how close they were, how far they were. I mean, other than earlier, of course, we did hear from a firearms expert that was talking about how you can look at the various, pellet movements that can indicate how close or far an injury is from the barrel, right? Because it's the further away you are, the more spread out they get. But again, this is just trying, like, the theme of this cross-examination is, but you don't really know, right? So let's continue.
the shooter steps back from his target, beyond that 5 or 6 feet range, will the distant shot look exactly the same? In other words, will you see the same sort of characteristics for the wound?
No, the pattern starts spreading out. If you think of it as a circle of spread, the diameter of the circle will start increasing.
The further you go back, the more
further-
spread you're going to get.
That's correct.
And what in your examination tips you off that it's a distant shot is this satellite effect that you testified about, correct? That is,
Yes.
the shots appear to be spreading.
In other words, there's not one central or major hole. There's just a series of individual small holes.
And you also look to see if there's any gunpowder or gases sprayed onto the wound.
That's correct.
That will tell you whether it's a close-in
That's it.
shot.
That's a closer range, yes. A shotgun wound at closer range would be expected to leave smoke or powder on the target. That's correct.
And you saw none of that with reference to any of the wounds except for the 2 contact wounds, which we have talked about earlier. Correct?
That's correct.
All right. one of the wounds you described was the thigh wound to Jose Menendez, correct?
Yes.
And that's wound number 5.
Yes.
And I think you said as to that particular wound that you recovered no pellets inside the wound, correct?
Yes.
And I think you also testified that the wound the direction of the wound was from the inner part of the thigh to the outer part of the thigh. Is that also correct?
Yes.
And again, may I approach a witness?
You may.
Showing you photograph number 93. Could you just take a look at that photograph? And I think it would again be stipulated this is a photograph taken at the scene where the bodies were recovered. Correct, counsel?
Pardon me, I'm sorry.
Stipulate to the photograph that it's an accurate
Yes.
depiction of
The crime scene.
the body at the place where it was located.
Yes.
Yes.
I would stipulate it was located by the police.
And doctor, if you would, could you step down and just draw for the jury with a pen, which I'll give to you, the direction that that wound to the left thigh would have been going in based on your examination? Yes.
So yeah, this is one of the few injury photos that I'm actually going to be showing here.
Okay, thank you. And since there were no pellets inside the wound.
Mr. Burt, you would like him to mark the other photograph as well so that we
Yes.
have the same marking?
Handing you the other photograph, if you could just also draw that same arrow.
And that exhibit number was what? That was
Counsel,
93?
93, I believe. Right. Doctor, with reference to this wound, your arrow indicates that the wound comes in on the inside of the thigh and goes out in the direction indicated by the arrow, correct?
Yes.
Now, as the pellets enter that wound, and you don't find any pellets in the wound, what happens to the pellets when it comes out the other side of the wound?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean by what happens
So
to.
what direction, since there are no wounds in the pellet,
Yeah, the leg is
no
actually,
pellets in the wound, what happens to the pellets?
they go out in the direction of the arrow.
And is there also material, blood, and body particles that are blown out in the same direction?
Yes, it's very possible.
And do you see on this side of the couch any indication that there's blood or body particles?
Interesting.
Well, I don't see any, I don't see anything to my unaided eye examination, no.
So what they're getting at here is the possibility that the two have been moved since between the time that they were shot and the time that they were photographed for evidence. So there's a question here as to whether or not this crime scene was tampered with during or before the investigation. It's an interesting point to bring up as well, to say, like, look, I mean, if he had been shot through the leg, wouldn't there be stuff on the other end? Right?
What does that suggest to you as a forensic pathologist as to whether Jose Menendez was seated at the time that wound was inflicted?
Well, the way that picture shows, the exit wound is in front. Am I incorrect? The exit wound appears to be in front of that couch and not right next to it. I'm not sure whether it's the exit wound is so far in front of the. I don't have a good depth perception, that wound on the left side of the thigh, in the picture would be on the right, but on the outer side of his left thigh may be so far in front of the couch that it just missed it.
And where would it go if your perception of that?
It would go towards, on the photo, it would go towards the right, to the floor or something like in that direction.
All right. I have another photograph by Mark.
All right, you don't have to approach the clerk at this point. Just put marks on the back of them with a pen so that we know what they are.
Should be
94. All right, these are photographs of what?
I will stipulate that these are crime scene photographs. I believe.
All right, I just want Mr. Burt to describe it for the record. What is it?
So it's another angle on the same area depicted in 92.
The sofa area?
Yes.
All right.
Doctor, showing you first so you can take a look at it. 92. Does that help you any on the perspective?
This is 94.
94.
Yes.
And now let me put that up if I could. What does that tell you in respect to where the leg was situated near the couch?
Well, it was exactly there at the time the wound was inflicted. I mean, in that location, there may have, you might expect some blood soiling on the material, if that's exactly where it was at the time.
And
Because it appears to be very close to the wound.
in other words, you would expect, given the direction of that wound, that if he were seated there at the time the wound was inflicted, you would see some blood soiling in the area of the couch to the left of the body.
Very likely, yes, that's correct.
Okay. And I think you also described that you had certain wounds to the back of Jose Menendez's arms, correct?
Yes.
And where were those wounds located?
Well, one was on the left elbow. That was the one we called number 4. And on the back of the right forearm, that was another entrance wound. That was number 3.
And showing you, it's been marked as 7B.
What photograph is that, please?
7B is a photograph that I believe is in evidence.
Oh, okay, all right.
You see in this photograph, doctor, that Jose Menendez is seated on the couch with both of his arms up against the back of the couch, correct?
Yes.
And is there any way that the shotgun wounds that you saw that were inflicted on the back of his elbow, the left elbow, and the shot to the back of the right arm, could those have been inflicted while he was seated in the position in which he's shown in that photograph?
Not on the back of the left elbow. It would have to go through the, if it was, that's the exact position, it would have to obviously go through the I guess you'd call that the arm. It would have to go through the couch. And on the back of the right forearm, if the back of the right forearm were on the seat of the couch, there's no way it could go through. The arms would have to be removed from the couch in order
The
for
point
those
is, this was
wounds
not
to
the
be
position
inflicted.
he was in.
In other
when
words,
he
the
was
only
shot.
way it could happen is if someone shot through the back of the couch into the arm as they rested in the position they're depicted there.
Yes.
The other possibility is that he's up and moving and has his arms in such a position that the shots are inflicted while he's moving and standing up.
That, or if the arms are elevated while he's sitting, as long as there's no couch in the way, yes.
And the fact that those wounds to the back of the left and the right arm are in the back, that does not in any way suggest to you that the shooter is necessarily standing behind Jose Menendez when those wounds are inflicted, correct?
That's correct. That's why I say posterior or an anterior instead of back or front. That's correct.
Because he could be moving his arms in such a way, if he had them up, for instance.
In other words, I can be facing you and I can put the back of my hand or arm facing you.
All right. And with respect to Mary Louise Menendez, you also have wounds to the back of her leg. Is that right?
Yes?
And again, those wounds could not have been inflicted if she was in the position she's depicted in that photograph, correct?
It appears that the back of her body, including her leg, is against the couch. Is that the correct assumption? It's lying against the couch.
So it appears from the photograph, but you
Well,
tell me.
then there's no way the wounds could go through to the leg and not hit the couch. So it appears to be impossible. And there's no indication from my exam that any of the wounds went through the couch.
So again, there must have been some relative movement by her at some point when those wounds were inflicted, correct?
Yes, or that she was not near, that was not the position, her final position was not where the wounds were inflicted.
Now, I think you described all of the wounds as being anti-mortem, correct?
As best as I can tell with a normal pathological examination, all appear to have bruising or vital reaction, yes.
And I wonder if you could explain for us a little bit more. You were discussing earlier that bodies after they're dead can bleed, but that's not what you're talking about, is it?
No, that's not what I'm talking about.
Tell the juries the difference between what is seen in photographs in this case where blood is coming out of wounds, and the kind of hemorrhaging that you're talking about, which allows you to determine that wounds are either inflicted before or after death.
Well, it's basically what I'm talking about is the bruising caused by a wound on a living body. If a living person, you or I or anyone, causes an injury, whether it's a cut or a bruise or a scrape, the tissue turns red because of the bleeding into the injured area, whether it's capillary or a small blood vessel. And that's the vital reaction. On a dead body, that will not occur. If you scratch a dead body, it won't turn red. It'll be a yellow color. If you strike a dead body, what would ordinarily cause a bruise or a welt, that bruise or welt will not happen. So we're talking about a vital reaction on a living body.
And this vital reaction you're talking about happened up to the point in time when the heart stops pumping blood.
Yes.
And that's what you mean by anti-mortem.
That's right.
That is that there's some blood pressure at the point in time when the wound is inflicted.
That's correct.
And I think you said that all the wounds in this case, anti-mortem, and in particular the wound to Jose Menendez's head, you described as instantaneously fatal?
Oh, no, I think I modified that and said I couldn't give an exact time. I said it would appear to be a rapidly fatal wound from all the injury. But I went into some description that a forensic pathologist can't give the exact time of death or duration of survival.
Now, how did you describe the wound in your autopsy report? I don't mean the entire wound, but as to whether it was rapidly fatal or
I said in the report, I said immediately fatal.
you said immediately fatal.
Yes.
And by fatal, you mean that the heart would stop pumping blood
Or
very rapidly.
yes.
Now, was there anything in your examination which allows you to tell the juries anything about the sequence of the shots? That is, which wound was inflicted first, or who got shot first, as between Mary Louise Menendez and Jose Menendez?
No,
One of the things your examination did indicate was that this head wound was, as you described it, immediately fatal, correct?
well, upon further reflection, I think I testified earlier that I would say rapidly fatal.
All right. And if it was immediately fatal, and that head wound was the first wound inflicted, would that mean, according to what you've told the jury so far, that the rest of the wounds inflicted on Jose Menendez would have been post-mortem wounds?
Post or immediately post-mortem, if there was a rapid sequence.
So in other words, if the sequence of the shots was the head wound first, and the person died immediately as a result of that head wound,
Yes,
and then started shooting the body in other areas, then those wounds you would see at the autopsy as being post-mortem wounds, right?
if the heart stopped immediately, if there was no blood pressure, very likely the other wounds in the sequence would look somewhat different. There wouldn't be as much hemorrhage, or as we would say, bruising or vital reaction in those wounds. That's correct.
And you're saying that those wounds, in this case, based on your examination, those wounds were anti-mortem wounds. That is, the wounds other than the head wound.
Yes, yes. Everyone had the vital reaction, the bleeding along the wound path, the bruising. That's correct.
Which means that one consistent interpretation based on your examination is that all of the wounds except the head wounds were inflicted, and then the head wound was inflicted last. Certainly consistent.
That is very consistent interpretation. Yes.
And if it had been the other way around, that is, if the head wound had been inflicted first and he had died immediately, then that would not be consistent with your examination, because those other wounds we know were not post-mortem, correct?
That's correct.
And when you say you're modifying somewhat your interpretation of whether the head wound was immediate, I think you explained that that is based on reports in the literature that you have read, indicating that sometimes people with serious wounds survive for some length of time, right?
That's correct.
But in this particular case, you have no evidence to suggest to you that that happened, correct?
That's correct.
And it could very well be that that wound to the head was immediately fatal, in the sense that most people think of immediate, that is instantaneous.
Yes.
Doctor, if we could just for a minute turn to the Mary Louise autopsy. And I think you said that your examination.
So I think what he was getting at in the last line of questioning is basically the prosecution wants to make it look like there was probably time in between these shots, right? So even if the first shot was legally justified, each one after that may not have been. So if there's a way to show or to make it look like these shots were extended in time, like there was a pause in between each of these, you can sort of like reset the mental state to say they were already incapacitated. Every shot after that was unnecessary, and that therefore it's murder. The defense, on the other hand, however, wants to make this look like no, like this was instantaneous. We want all of these injuries to look like they were very close together, and that this was something that just, it started and ended very quickly. Because if that's the case, then you don't have to look at each individual gunshot, each individual, like the thing that happened, and kind of slow down and focus on each one on its own. So, that's why he's focusing so much on like instantaneous death versus like almost immediate death. It seems like they're splitting hairs, but really he's trying to speed up the pace of the time in between gunshots so that so that the jury has that impression that this was all very, very fast paced and basically like done in a flash.
It can reveal ten separate locations of injury. Is that correct?
Yes.
And are we clear at this point that the 10 separate locations of injury in no way means that that's the number of shots that were fired?
That's correct. In fact, I think that some on the face may be either one shot or possibly one on the face, particularly the right side, may have passed through the hand. So that's correct. I can't give an unequivocal number based on that. I give the maximum number that I've identified if everyone is an individual shot.
And is one of the reasons why some of those shots could be coming from, some of those wounds could be coming from the same shot because of the nature of a shotgun. That is, it's a scatter gun.
Yes, very especially in the distant shots where there's a scattering of pellets. That's correct. More than one part of the body may be struck. Very often that happens.
And so the number of wounds in this case, with respect to Mary Menendez, does not tell a jury how many shots were fired necessarily, does it? Not
necessarily, no.
And the same thing with respect to Jose Menendez, correct?
That's correct. In fact, I think the one on the on Jose Menendez, the one on the chest, I had an individual wound. Most likely is related to the group on the right arm, because it would be unlikely just to have a once isolated, let's say, flyer on the right side of the chest, and with the arm most likely being against the side is most likely all one shotgun wound.
And it's also true, is it not?
So that's important too, because the prosecution has just shown all of these images that are very, very gruesome in nature. And it gives the impression of like, this was an absolute bloodbath, right? They're tough. They're tough to look at. But the point here that the defense is making, and this witness has confirmed, is that the fact that you have multiple injuries to someone doesn't necessarily mean that each of those injuries was caused by a different gunshot. So, you know, he's pointing to like the ear and shoulder thing, saying that was probably all one. So meaning, yes, you have all of these injuries, but the things that they did to cause those injuries may have been less. So it kind of dials back some of the emotionality of those photos that we just spent a lot of time painstakingly going through. Yeah. So this is a good point too. Good point for the defense right here.
Not that some of the wounds could have inflicted injuries on both Jose and Mary Louise. That is, they could have passed through one person and into the other.
That is possible under the appropriate positions and circumstances of the two victims. Yes.
And how does that happen? If you could explain that just a little bit.
Well, in the same way that a shotgun wound can pass through two parts of the same body, a cluster of shotgun pellets can pass to parts of different bodies if they're close enough. In other words, a volley of shot can go through, let's say, a thin portion of a person's body, let's say a limb or a hand, and then continue on and strike another person.
And it's also true, is it not, that with shotguns, and especially with distant shots, that as the shotgun pellets scatter out, that some of the pellets may hit one target and some from the same shot may hit another.
That is true under the appropriate circumstance. That's
Yeah.
correct.
And in
Point.
this case, in fact, your examination revealed that most
It's the nature of using a shotgun as opposed to some other kind of a firearm, where you've got a single bullet, right? You've got multiple fragments that are splayed out, and especially the further back you are when you shoot them, the more likely you are to hit various parts of various targets.
most of the wounds, with the exception of 2, which I'll get to in a moment, were buckshot wounds, correct?
2 definitely were the birdshot, the tiny ones. The others, I didn't characterize what size shot they were, not being a firearms examiner. I just called them a shotgun pellets. I'm not qualified to tell you what size shot they are. That's not
That's
my
fair.
field.
But basically, your examination
Difference.
revealed 2 types of ammunition, correct?
That's correct.
Birdshot and something larger, which through other evidence may be established to be buckshot, right?
Yes.
And is it also true that as to some of the wounds, especially the ones that you characterize as distant wounds, that the number of pellets you recovered was less than the number which would normally be in a loaded buckshot?
Objection to vague.
Sustained.
With respect to Jose Menendez, the number 4 wound, which you described in your autopsy as a wound to the left elbow,
Yes.
you discovered 9 wound defects with relation to that wound, correct?
Yes,
And yet you only recovered 5 pellets.
that's correct.
And it's possible that 4 of those pellets passed through that left arm, continued on into her, correct?
It's possible.
And you also have wounds with respect to Mary Louise Menendez, where you have the number of pellet defects does not match up with the number of pellets you recovered, correct?
Yes. In many of these, there were so many. I took fewer pellets were recovered than actual individual wounds on the skin. That's correct. So some were left, some were either left in the body or some may have passed through.
Passed through to the other person.
Possibly to the other person, yes.
And again, we don't know the sequence as to who was shot first. It could have passed from Jose Menendez into Mary, or it could have passed from Mary into Jose Menendez, correct?
That's right. The sequence of shots fired is not known to me.
Now, what is known to you is that 2 types of ammunition were present. Does that mean that 2 guns were necessarily used?
No, it just means 2 different types of cartridges. I have no knowledge about how many weapons were used. That just means 2 different cartridge loadings.
In other words, you can take a load of birdshot and chamber it into a shotgun and also chamber a load of buckshot right behind that and shoot it from the same gun, and you're going to have 2 different types of ammunition in the wound, correct?
That's correct.
Could I have 1 minute, Your Honor?
Yes.
While they're taking a pause, I'm going to answer some questions here that came up that I saved. Debbie Faison Cook says, question, why do they put up autopsy photos in open court? Why don't they just give them to the jury during deliberations? Because they have to introduce them as evidence during the trial. So it has to come out through testimony. You need to have someone that can establish the foundation of these documents, to show these documents, these photos, to show that they are what they depict, and to also walk the jury through why these different images are significant in the first place. So as uncomfortable as it is, it's something that has to be played out in open court like that. So yeah. Aaron Morgan says, is it okay that I still haven't decided how I feel about the boys? On the one hand, I don't like this process of the dual trial and feel for them with the treatment from the parents. I am so with you. The oh, excuse me. The more, excuse me, the more I think about it, the more I mean, granted, we are in the prosecution's case in chief, and there are things that I like more about the defense attorneys and their style and the things that they are doing. But I still, and I understand also, before I say that, before I understand that the defendants here were under massive, massive, massive auspices of abuse. And Secret Mix Girl also asked here, what evidence was there that the parents abused them? Just wondering. That is going to, I think there's going to be testimony coming from a cousin or someone who would testify that one of the boys had told them, like, when they were children, when they were really young, some family member who testifies that, like, they told me about this like years ago and no one knew what to do about it in the family. This was at least what I heard other family members saying. I don't know if somebody actually ended up testifying to that in the trial, but that's what I'm expecting to hear in the defense case in chief. And then obviously the testimony from the Menendez brothers themselves. But for me, I so far, I do have a sense that they may have truly been abused in the way that they say that they were abused and for a long period of time. But at the same time, the law doesn't like when people take matters into their own hands. The law doesn't like vigilantism. So when someone has been abused for so many years and then decides to turn around and return that violence or return violence in one form or another, in order to get that to stop, we have to live in a society where there are other means for someone to get out of that. And it's not to say that I don't understand what people are going through when they are in that place, right? When they are being abused, that sometimes it can feel as though they are trapped. And I definitely understand that so far here they have started to establish through the evidence here this feeling that the brothers had, they're men, that they had, that, even after college, their dad had this grand plan that they were all going to live like on the same compound. And like when the guys got married, then everyone would come in and like live together and they would all have to live in the same environment. So it's like dad was so powerful that he had the ability to control them for the rest of their lives and kind of like force them with golden handcuffs essentially to live this gilded caged kind of life, but also in which they were being completely abused. So I can understand that feeling that they probably had, but you can't just allow people to do that, right? It's still wrong to kill someone even when they have been abused like that. And it's one of these things that feels very difficult for all of us to sort of wrestle with, because when the victim in the case, or the alleged victim in the case, or alleged victims, when they are not good people, it's hard to rally behind the prosecution in a case like that and to say, yes, put these guys in prison. They are 100%, like, this is completely black and white. This is more of a gray area kind of a case because of that. So I totally understand this struggle of like, did these guys deserve it? Did they really deserve it? If I were on the jury, at least at this point, granted, we're going to hear from the defense as well. Maybe my mind will change as we continue to watch the evidence. But so far, based on what I'm seeing, if I'm on the jury, I am in favor of convicting, but then at sentencing, giving them a lower, like wanting them to be sentenced at a lower at a lower sentencing because of the fact that it's like, okay, yes, they did the wrong thing. This does seem to be a unique situation, and that unique situation no longer exists because the parents are no longer there. And this seems to be something that is like completely unique. And that they don't seem to be the type of people that would do this again. I don't know. That's my thoughts so far. But yeah, Aaron, I completely understand your tension that you're feeling between the two. Wank Shaftesbury says, is it being questioned that they did it? I thought it was accepted and this was just the length of their sentence. No, this is so they admitted in, or they said in the opening statements, both of the defense attorneys said in the opening statements, they were not disputing the identity of the shooters, right? Like the Menendez brothers admit that they were the ones that came in there and shot their parents with shotguns. But the question is still on whether to convict or not to convict. And the basis of the defense argument is that they were legally justified because of this sort of, I call it expanded self-defense, because they say that they were living under this abuse for so long and primarily by their dad, but mom was basically supporting it. And that because of that, they like essentially snapped and then had no other alternative but to do this just so that they could get out of the abuse. That's basically the main argument here. So whether or not that is convincing to the jury, well, I was going to say we'll find out, but a lot of us already know. Okay. Anyway, with that, let's continue. So, pause, look through his notes, trying to figure out if he's going to ask another question.
Throughout your testimony, you referred to incapacitation, and you referred to incapacitation, for instance, with reference to the thumb wound to Mary Louise Menendez. What does that term mean in reference to a thumb wound? Incapacitation.
Inability to operate or move the thumb or use the thumb.
And when you were using that term earlier, was it in reference to the wound you were describing? That is, if it's a broken arm, then the person is incapacitated in the sense that they cannot use the arm.
Yes.
Doesn't mean that they're down and out or unconscious or anything like that, does it?
No, I make no implication about, as you said, down and out or unconscious, no.
Except with reference to the head wound.
Yes.
That certainly is a wound that would have rendered anyone unconscious, correct?
Correct.
And I think with reference to Mary Menendez, you described the wounds, all those wounds, as anti-mortem also, correct?
Yes.
And does that suggest to you that the wounds in reference to her must have been inflicted in very rapid succession?
Yes.
Could you explain to the jury why you reached that conclusion?
Well, the exact time is not known to me, but the longer the duration, in shotgun wounds, especially if they're severe or rapidly fatal wounds, if you wait long enough, then some of the wounds will become post-mortem. So in a sequence such as this, with multiple shotgun wounds, the assumption is that it's a fairly rapid sequence until the actual fatal wound is inflicted.
And would your opinion be the same with reference to Jose Menendez? That is, your examination suggested a rapid sequence in terms of the shots being fired in quick succession.
All the autopsy evidence suggests that, and that they were all ante-mortem.
Thank you. That's all I have, Doctor.
You never went to the crime scene in this case, is that correct?
Yes.
So all you
Right,
can do
this
is
is
look at
redirect
photographs
now.
that we have for you, correct?
Correct.
I'm showing you a photograph which has been marked as Exhibit 95, which appears to depict which side of Mrs. Menendez's body?
The left side?
And now I believe in your testimony, you indicated that many of the wounds to Mrs. Menendez, especially to her legs, it appears, were in fact on the left side of the body. Is that correct?
At least 2 were on the left leg and 1 on the behind the left knee. That's correct.
Now, in this particular photograph, 95, would you say it's clear that the wound to the back of her knee, which we call wound number 8, could not have been inflicted in this particular position? Can you say that?
If that's the position the leg's
Okay,
in,
this is actually
I don't see
not
how,
as
because that area is
At least from this angle.
hidden or
It's not an autopsy
concealed
photo,
by
at
the
least.
bending of the knee.
Now, as to other, you've described injury
Okay.
number 7, I believe, in your testimony. Do you see anything in this photograph 95 that corresponds to injury number 7?
Well, I see a heavy blood stain on the left hip region, extending up to the waist region.
Do you also see the area which you call the graze wound, which is wound number 9, in this photograph?
I believe I do, yes. The heavy blood stain and some dark material on the outer side of the left calf, yes.
In addition, I believe you testified earlier that there were 2 wounds to the left side near her face. One is we call wound number 1, which was the contact wound, and one is the wound area number 4, which is the shoulder and the ear area. Is that correct?
Yes,
And in this photograph, you can't see her head exactly, but it appears that her head is rested on the right side. That would be consistent with what you see in the photograph, correct?
correct.
Dr. Golden, do you know how long it takes for a human heart to stop pumping blood once there has been inflicted an immediately fatal wound?
Well, if it's immediately fatal, it would be immediate stoppage
Okay,
of
now,
vital function. In other words, respiration and heartbeat.
do you know in this case how long the heart continued to pump after the wounds were inflicted?
In each individual or just one of them?
Just in any of the wounds in either of the decedents, which you have classified as immediately fatal, do you have any knowledge as to how long the heart would have pumped after those wounds?
No, except the head, the shotgun wound of the head of Jose Menendez may have been. Again, I don't know for sure. The others on Mary Menendez, no, I do not know how long it would take for the heart to stop beating. That's correct.
I believe, by the way, do you know how long it takes
It
to
took a while to
empty a
get there,
shotgun?
but we got
A
there.
6-shot shotgun? Do you have any personal knowledge of that?
Objection, Your Honor. Houston Sachs not named.
Sustain.
Yeah.
Dr. Golden, you've indicated in some of your testimony that shot could pass through one body and then go into another body. Is that correct?
Yes.
Would the passage from one body into another distort the pattern when it gets to the second body?
Objection on defense command.
Do you know?
Objection overruled. Can you answer that question? Do you have the experience and background to do that?
Yeah, he's not a
If by
firearms
distort is meant
expert.
change, then yes.
All right, that's what I meant. Would it change the pattern?
Yes, it can. It can cause a ricocheting effect, striking one target, which I would call the
He didn't actually.
intermediate target or the
Answered the
primary
ultimate
target instead of the
question,
second.
not
It
the
can cause
foundational
ricocheting, and then
But that's
a
fine.
close clustering can then become a widely dispersed pattern. Yes, that happens.
And lastly, you were asked about incapacitation. And for instance, we talked about the wound number 10 to Mrs. Menendez's hand. Would that be less incapacitating than, say, a wound that goes through the leg? In other words, let me back up. My question is, are some wounds more incapacitating than others?
Yes,
And is incapacitation a term which describes a range of events or a range of possibilities?
yes.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Any recross?
Couple of questions. Doctor, is that
Couple
a
questions on
photograph that was
recross.
just put on the board depict what you described as wound number 7 for Murray Menendez?
Yes, I believe so, yes.
And that was the wound which I think you described as multiple pellet defects,
Yes,
indicating that that's a distant shot, correct?
yes.
And what is the trajectory or direction of that shot?
Okay, we have to put that in the anatomical position, and I believe that trajectory would be, I'd like to check my report here. That trajectory, as best that I could determine, was from the outside in, and it was slightly front to back and proximal to distal. Proximal to distal meaning going from the toe toward the head.
I wonder on the diagram that's depicted there, if you could draw in some arrows as to the direction of that particular.
Yes.
one. And if you could, just for clarification, draw in the direction of the other moves as well. The trajectory of the other moves.
All of them?
Be able to do that, if you could.
I don't think I can on the ones going front to back because
How about on 7? Do that on 7.
yes. Seven is hard for me to do because it's going from the outside of the thigh and there's an exit on the back, so it's going inward towards the middle and out the back, so it's from front to back basically, and maybe a little bit upward, and from outward to inward. It's almost easier to do on the human body. It's basically going inward and sort of out through the back of the thigh. This is left, so that's the back, and there's a big exit hole on the back. So it's going from front to back and inward towards the middle.
When you say front to back, are you meaning perpendicular to where the green dot is?
Well, it's not. It's sort of.
It's
It's
hard
going
because these are
inward towards
two-dimensional
the hip
images.
bone and then coming out in the back. So basically, it's going from the side inward a little.
I understand
So
what he's trying to say.
Well, front to back means this would be actually front, but it's on the side and it's going out the back of the.
It's kind of going at an angle.
What I would like to know is whether you can show us in terms of the angle at which the shot is coming in.
Oh, I don't believe with a distant wound such as this, that is it's a 3-inch pattern of spread, so that means it's at a again, I don't know, there's no exact way of knowing it, but at a 3 inches, that's going to be maybe several yards away, so that's going to be hard to get an angle.
My question though is the shot coming directly into the thigh as opposed to coming in at some angle?
It's coming in at an angle and it strikes the bone, the femur, and then probably ricochet off the femur out the back.
And what is the angle? Can you draw in the angle at what she shot us.
I don't believe so. I think what's happened here is the pellets have struck and fractured the femur, and then a lot of them have ricocheted off the bone and have gone out the back.
And it could it be coming in directly perpendicular?
Yes.
In other words, if she's standing up, could that wound 7 be caused by someone standing at a distance and shooting directly into that wound, to that area?
Yes, that's possible. Yes.
And if that is, in other words, that's consistent with your examination.
Yes.
And if that were the way in which that wound was inflicted, would you say, given the position she's in, that the only way that could have come in perpendicular is if someone was on the ceiling shooting straight down? If she's lying down when that wound is inflicted.
Again, I can't tell you exactly where the person was, but the gun would have to be held at a distance away and shot downward if that's her final position.
In other words, if the wound was inflicted while she was lying down, as she's depicted in that photograph, and if the wound is coming in perpendicular, which you say is consistent with your examination, the shooter would have to be up on the ceiling shooting straight down, wouldn't he, or she?
Yes, or several feet, yes.
And the other possibility is she's standing up, is moving, or in a stationary position, and the wound comes in directly into the thigh and passes through, and the exit wound is caused in the way your examination indicates.
Yes, that's another consistent interpretation, yes.
And wound number 8, which is the shot to the back of her left ankle, that could not possibly...
The popliteal fossa, behind the knee.
Yes. That wound could not possibly have been inflicted while she was in the position she's depicted in that photograph.
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, anything else?
No?
Okay, thank you. You may step down. You're excused.
Thank you.
All right, the next witness will be tomorrow morning, and counsel will be discussing some matters with me this afternoon and also tomorrow at 9. So we'll get started at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning with, people are going to be proceeding with the jury of only Erik Menendez in the morning. Is that right?
Yes.
All right, and how long do you think that would take? Okay, so what we'll do is ask that the Erik Menendez jury be here at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, and that the Lyle Menendez jury be here at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, at which time we'll resume. The Erik Menendez jury, if you would report to this courtroom and go into the jury room, and as soon as you're ready, and we're ready, we'll have you come out and we'll begin. And the Lyle Menendez jury, if you would go next door to the courtroom next door and report in there and wait until we give you the word to come back into this courtroom, and then we'll have you in as well. And just remind you not to discuss this case with anyone, not to form any final opinions about it, not to look at or be exposed to any news coverage or any other coverage about this case or discussions of it or
Okay.
any mention of it in any source.
Okay, so that's about that. So, so we are finally through the gruesome stuff. The all of the gruesome, bloody photos and awful things that you guys can see for yourself if you would like at the Court TV website. They've got all of these streams are all on there. So if you do want to see the full experience that the jury did see, that's where you can go and see those. We do have some questions here. Also before we head out. So Debbie Faison Cook says, so real question, would they have been found not guilty if they were poor? This is obviously there's no way to know for real, right? Because this is just postulating. But I don't know. I mean, an argument can be made in either direction. But I think that there was a lot that was done about their wealth, because I think a lot of people have a perception too that Well, I mean, the prosecution did run with the argument that they did it for the money, right? They did it for the will. They were trying to find the will that still had their names in it. They bought the Rolexes and all this other stuff. So there is that argument that they did it for the money, but at the same time, I think that also there is a perception among a lot of people that when someone has a lot of resources, like the Menendez brothers did, and they have access to a lot of them, that they also have a greater ability to leave the abuse more so than someone who is in a lower socioeconomic kind of status. At the same time, though, I don't know if I completely buy that argument in this particular case, because the fact that they have made a decent establishment of the idea that Jose Menendez was planning to control them for basically the rest of their lives. And that he actually had the resources to do so. Like, this is somebody who was insanely wealthy. And it sounds like these guys were not raised in such a way so that they could actually stand up for themselves as young men, to be their own men in the world, and to stand up to their own father, and to sort of put up boundaries between him and them moving forward, and that they were afraid of him from what it looks like. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe their wealth would have played a difference. Maybe not. I don't know. It's hard to tell. By the way, fun times. Thanks so much for gifting 5 Legalbytes memberships. That is so kind, so generous of you. I know Lucky donated some memberships, or bought memberships for gifted some memberships for other people earlier today. And fun times, thank you so much for gifting to 5 more people, and to all those that are now members of Bike Club. Welcome to Bike Club. I hope you guys can join us for our members only live stream on Friday, where we are just having a casual kind of hangout live stream. Like I said earlier, where we talk about law, sometimes don't talk about law. It's very casual, very free flowing. And we can kind of talk about some of the content that might be coming up on the channel. You guys can help me kind of figure out what folks are interested in, so you have the ability to sort of give some feedback about where I should go with particular topics moving forward. So one more question here is from Ellen, not Sarah Lee. Says, if they had been able to discuss the abuse in the second trial, they wouldn't be in jail, in my honest opinion. Alita, why did they leave out the abuse factor in the second trial? Seems it was the motivating factor. I actually don't know for sure. I think it may have been that evidence was just kept out by the judge. I don't know exactly what happened, what the arguments were, what the discussion was, and what the judge's reasoning was. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, and there are folks in the chat also who are basically experts on this case, that can chime in if I'm wrong about that. But I've intentionally not been researching this case very much going into this, because I wanted to make sure, I wanted to kind of give my impressions moving along as I'm watching it. But my understanding, and hopefully it's correct, my understanding is that the judge actually excluded all of that evidence. And I don't know the bases for that, if that is what happened. Okay, so I think that's all the questions here. I apologize if I missed someone. Oh, here's one. Desiree Morgan says, apologies if this is obvious or I missed something, but the 2 brothers are being tried together, right? If so, is that normal procedure? So this is actually a very, very, very unique case. It's kind of crazy how they're doing this, but they are actually, so yeah, the brothers are being tried at the same time, but with 2 different juries. So there are 2 juries in the courtroom right now. And at various points in the trial, they will have, at various points in the trial, they will have either one jury or another jury or both juries. So sometimes they'll, so at the end of this here, the judge said tomorrow 10 a.m. is when I think Lyle Menendez's jury is going to be here, and then 11 a.m. we want everyone else to be here as well. So the first part of the testimony is going to be just for Lyle Menendez's jury, just for his case, and so then the rest of the testimony is going to be for everyone. And so you guys know, I know that there are some folks here who do understand, or who are very familiar with this case and what happened. The next witness that we are going to be hearing from is Dr. Oziel. There's going to be a lot of testimony coming from Dr. Oziel. I know that there's going to be a lot of interest from that. He is the psychologist or psychiatrist, who one or both of the brothers was going to for therapy and basically admitted all of these, admitted to all of these killings during some therapy sessions. And that's ultimately how the Menendez brothers were taken in. The cops weren't even really investigating them, from what I understand, before that point, before they found out about these confessions to the psychologist. All kinds of legal issues about whether or not that is something that can be disclosed, because that is a doctor-patient disclosure. That's technically should be privileged, but there's a whole new exception to that privilege that was created because of this case. The question went all the way up until up to the I think just up to the appellate court, appellate level, where the court said, essentially, if someone is going to therapy and they are making they're making admissions to their therapist about things that indicate that they may do harm to someone in the future, that the psychologist or the psychiatrist is not only able to disclose that, but is actually in fact required to disclose that to the relevant authorities. So this is a interesting kind of development that happened because of this case, and that's something that impacted the law here. And folks are asking, isn't that hearsay? We are talking about an admission against the party's interests. So if you watched the Depp v. Heard trial, we had all kinds of statements that were made by Amber Heard and by Johnny Depp that were admitted as evidence into the trial, because they were statements that were like, if they essentially, the concept of a statement against someone's interest is a person has no reason to be making a statement that is against their own interests unless it's actually true. So that's one of those exceptions to hearsay that allows that statement to come in. So if you have a defendant that makes admissions to people about that they did something that's against the law, that's something that is going to be coming in, because it's pretty it's a pretty strong exception to the hearsay rule. Okay. So yeah, I think that is about it. I apologize if I missed some questions there, but I think I got them all. Okay. Well, thanks so much for joining me today for this. This has been very interesting, very fascinating. I think seeing the cross-examination, this was a pretty decent cross-examination. The images are very, very, very splashy, we could say, for the jury. So there's no, for the defense, there's no way that they can just completely rehabilitate all of the damage that is done by those photos being put in front of the jury, right? It's just they are bad, and they are just very bad. So, but I will say that the cross-examination probably did about as good a job as they could do. in trying to like lower like the egregiousness of how bad those photos look, right? By saying that, okay, yes, there are multiple injuries, but multiple injuries can be made with one gunshot, right? Is showing how there's some discrepancies between these wounds and the directions that they're in and the couch that's right behind them and all this kind of stuff. So, anyway, this was good. This was good. And next time, like I said, we've got Dr. Oziel. It's going to be really, really interesting. So be sure to tune in next week as well. Same time, Monday, East Coast time, noon. Sorry, I meant to say Monday noon East Coast time. Okay. All righty. Thank you everyone for joining me. And thank you, of course, as always, to all of the mods for helping to maintain a working environment for everybody to come in, bring their perceptions, bring their impressions, and talk through how they're thinking and feeling about what they're watching. Because it is it's a wonderful place to have agreement or disagreement. And I love the fact that people feel comfortable with bringing all of their best ideas. And before we do actually head out, all of our love, thoughts, and prayers to Rick Hogue and his whole family. He is continuing to recover from his stroke, and it's slow, it's gradual, right? It's all baby steps, but every day there are new developments that we are getting from Mrs. Hogue. She's posting on Twitter on her Twitter account, and then she's also been posting on the community tab for Hogue Law for his channel. So if you guys want to support, one of the best things that you can do right now is, especially if you're not in a position to actually donate money, but one of the best things that you can do is to go to Rick Hogue's channel, go to Hogue Law, and go and watch a bunch of his content. Comment on these videos, give showing your support, like all these videos if you haven't done so already. Put on a playlist and just play it all day long, because this kind of stuff really, really, really does help. So yeah, that about does it. Okay, guys. And with that, I will see you in the next video.